Long Take Review, where 4 college professors talk film, providing insight, not assigning homework. I'm your host, Jen Sipchakchai Bankard, and I'm here with 2 big, strong men. First, in his Octagon debut, it's Greg Cass. How's it going, Greg?
Rock smash! I'm good, Jen. How are you doing?
Listeners, that is not actually a quote from this movie. Do not be fooled. I'm doing great. Glad we're all here. And he needs something a little stronger than Advil. How are you doing, Antonio?
Day without pain is like a day without sunshine. And it was sunny as hell when I watched this movie, Jen.
Ouch. Teaser for what's to come. So, dear listeners, those were all references to the film we are here to review today, Benny Safdie's The Smashing Machine. The film follows the trials and tribulations of mixed martial arts and UFC champion Mark Kerr and his tempestuous relationship with girlfriend Dawn Staples. It stars Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson as Kerr, Emily Blunt as Dawn, and real-life MMA fighter Ryan Bader as Kerr's MMA compatriot Mark Coleman. I can tell you, that drove me nuts while I was watching this movie. I'll say right. I was like, where do I know this guy from? The film received a 15-minute standing ovation after it played at the Venice Film Festival last month and won the Silver Lion for Best Director. It's also receiving a lot of praise for its lead performance. So we have a lot to talk about potentially at the end of the show during Oscars watch for this one. If you are listening to us for the first time, we will have a spoiler-free section designed for those who have not yet seen the film. And then with a very clear alert, we will shift into spoiler mode for the rest of the show. If listeners need to go into rehab after listening to this episode because they're addicted to us, what can they do?
That took a dark turn.
Really
Why,
did.
Jen, if they think we should raise the belt, then of course they should not miss new episodes when they drop by following the Long Take Review wherever you get your podcasts. We host the feeds primarily on Substack at thelongtape.substack.com, where we're just racking up the likes. Thank you, listeners. But you can also find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Overcast, and more. Finally, if you want even more Long Take content, including trash talk about our movie rosters for the Vulture Movie League, you can also follow us on Instagram and Threads at The Long Take Review and on Letterboxd at LTR Pod.
Not many points on the board for this movie this weekend. We'll talk about it. So we'll start, as always, with the short take. What was everyone's general reaction to The Smashing Machine?
For me, this was a sort of middling film at best, at times just kind of boring and rote, and eventually for me became like staggeringly bad by the end. I found the fighting scenes to be shockingly repetitive and dull. I kind of disliked both of the central characters. To me, this seems like the kind of movie that you'd watch like in a hospital room by like terminal patients whenever their caregivers want to encourage them to walk toward the light. Greg, what are your thoughts?
Wow.
You know, sometimes in this life, you're walking around and you're having a great day. And then other times you're kneeling on the mat, face down, and somebody, despite it being against the rules, just kicks you repeatedly in the head over and over again. On the head, right here, against the rules. And I would say everything about The Smashing Machine felt like a kick to the head. There's so much talent behind this film. And I think Antonio and I might differ in that I would actually say The Rock has talent. It's a very specific brand of talent, but it has impressed me in the past, and it did not impress me this time around. Everything about this feels sweaty, as in we would really like some awards attention. Please give us some awards, please. No, when I'm mad, I'm going to break this door in half. Spoiler alert, because I need an Oscar, but it doesn't come together. And, you know, to sum up, I would just say, why to this movie? Jen, what did you think about this movie?
So I'm going to be good cop during this episode because, you know, I'm not necessarily recommending this movie to a whole lot of people. You know what I mean? We'll get into that in a second in recommendation algorithm. But, you know, I liked it just fine. I appreciated what it was trying to do. Here's my thing with this movie. We complain all the time about sports movies being formulaic and about biopics being formulaic. It's not that we can't complain if we don't like something that's trying, but it is trying. It is trying to do something different in this genre. To the extent to which it succeeds, like, we can talk about it, that's a different question. But I do think that, like, part of me, like, I appreciated what this movie was going for more than I enjoyed the execution of that oftentimes, if that makes sense. So I'm not like, I love this movie. I have watched a fair amount of UFC in my lifetime. And so I really actually had the opposite reaction to Antonio. Those were my favorite parts of the movie, or were the actual fights. They're repetitive because that's just how they are, Antonio. Sorry to say. It's like you gotta get the submission and the ground and pound. Like, that's just all we're going for most of the time. But so I appreciated. I liked the way that the actual matches were shot, and I did kind of like sad, gentle giant Rock. And I think he's doing actually a very good impression of Mark Kerr. in a way that I found interesting, at least. And since I wasn't, I am familiar with UFC and MMA, but I was not particularly familiar with Mark Kerr as a historical figure. I think his time predates sort of when I was watching it, but I feel like it was interesting for me to kind of like spend time with this character. I can't say that about all the characters. We'll get into it. I appreciate what this was trying to do. I didn't always enjoy it. It does drag in certain places because it is trying to go for like a cinema verite kind of thing that doesn't always come together, but it's trying. All right. So the recommendation algorithm is where we establish the audience of a film. We acknowledging that not every film is for everyone. So, this movie does, as I kind of alluded to a second ago, does come from a long tradition of boxing and wrestling films in American cinema, from Rocky to Raging Bull to The Wrestler and Creed, right? There's tons more. The list would be pretty big, actually, I think, if we really thought about it. How do you feel this fits in that tradition? If people like those kinds of movies, is this just, how would you pitch them on this one? What do we think?
How does it fit into this tradition? Not well, Jen. So, I'm not going to keep beating up on this movie, until it deserves it.
I'll defend it.
It's ground and pound time. I think there is something to what you said about where I would give it some credits is I like some of those cinema verite choices. I did like how often it felt, to me, as a very heavy consumer of the like mockumentary sitcom, there's always those moments on like The Office where you have to like do the spy shot because it doesn't actually make sense that people would act that way in front of the documentary crew or what have you. And it was really interesting to me that like so much of this movie looks like a spy shot, right? Like we really are kind of voyeuristically peeking into these lives. Except for when, like, sometimes we're in their most intimate spaces, and then it's just like shot like a regular movie because I don't know. It doesn't 100% maintain that illusion like something like The Office might force itself to. But I would say that's something that separates it from those traditions. I mean, I think the other piece, and I think this is what you alluded to, Jen, that almost all those movies you mentioned, there's always the big fight and the big match, and it's the build up to like the one big match. And there's a little of that here, but the movie is much less interested in that one big match than it is at like the day-to-day build up of what this life is like. So to me, if there's something to recommend about this, I don't know that I would go for that, like say like, oh, if you love Raging Bull, you should check this out. But I would almost say if you're somebody who's more into like the sports documentary industrial complex that has come up, I think this has much more in common with some of those productions and kind of behind the scenes. There's like a huge industry of WWF documentaries, right? Or sorry, it's WWE now, but like people who love that stuff and kind of seeing what these people put them through for entertainment. Are you not entertained? Then I think that's, the kind of pull this might have. Antonio, you said this was better than Creed, right?
It was really difficult for me to come up with a comp. I thought I flirted with Creed, but ultimately where I landed was I think that if you've ever watched a Lifetime movie and thought to yourself, hey, I kind of wish this was from the perspective of the man, then this is the film for you. Jen, what do you think?
I'm still processing what you just said. I love the sass. Yeah. Okay. So this movie, Greg is correct in pointing out that this movie's main subversion is in deglorifying the fighting, because I think if you watch like any kind of like wrestling, boxing, MMA, it's all about the kind of grandstanding and the spectacle, right? And that's both the fighters kind of they heckle each other right before matches and stuff like, you know what I mean? But it's also like the couple of times that I went to see one of these fights like live, they like have these songs that play and the people come out and it's like there's like sort of a pomp and circumstance to it a little bit. But what I liked about this movie is that it really kind of focused on these fighters not as like legendary figures or something like that, or performers, but specifically as just like working people, and that they have to pay their bills. And I really liked that the production design of this was like, everything looks very drab, and like especially like because the Rock is comically large in this, and so they have him sitting on small benches often in a way that just looks so sad. Yeah,
so
like he
good
just
too.
sits.
Yeah.
He spends a lot of time sitting in this movie, and it just looks very sad because he's just kind of like, I'm just a guy trying to make my way in the world. And so yeah, in that way I think it's interesting, because it's like if you're looking for a fresh take, like if you've been frustrated by the way some of those other movies we mentioned sort of do the like underdog and you're rooting for them and like that like traditional plot arc, this is probably at least going to pique your interest a little bit. It might not hold your interest, but it will pique it. So that's what I would say. It's kind of like the anti-fighting movie in a lot of ways, because it is very like documentary, trying to do like go for a documentary style. It is kind of similar to The Fighter with Christian Bale and is it Amy Adams?
Amy Adams.
But like Emily Blunt is doing a worse version of Amy Adams' character in that movie.
I actually think that Emily Blunt is doing both Amy Adams's character from The Fighter and Melissa Leo's character from The Fighter, and I think you can do both at the same time.
That's smart.
I hate to be contrarian, but I think Emily Blunt is clearly doing Heidi Gardner's the boxer's girlfriend character from Saturday Night Live, who is a great Weekend Update desk character who just always said, I'm taking the kids to my sisters, which is kind of the mode Emily Blunt falls into. I was just going to note, one of the things we talked about when we talked about F1 was how it kind of felt like it served the F1 fans and pulled in a larger crowd. I would say this felt very much like I was not a big enough UFC fan for it. And we should note that this is not actually about the UFC. It's about the pride fighting tournaments that in some ways predate or coexist with early UFC. So that was a surprise to me. But I think if you are a fan of UFC and you maybe have, gotten onto it within the last 10 years or so, I think this probably is a pretty fun experience to go back. That's very clearly set in, I think, 97 to 2002 is what the title card said. So it is like a glimpse into history that I think might appeal to you more than it did to me if you're already a fan of UFC.
Yeah, I think UFC, I think they did coexist and were at the same time, but I believe with Mark Kerr specifically, he kind of like switched from UFC, which I think predates where the movie starts, to the Pride League because they were going to pay him more money. Or at least that's what I gathered from the 15 minutes of the documentary that I watched. The other thing I'll ask about this in recommendation algorithm is like, do you feel like...
Yes, Jen, I do believe that fans of the Sugar Ray song every morning
fans of the Rock
will enjoy. Oh,
no. Sorry, I remembered. So I was listening to The Town on my way home from work, and really leaning hard, elbowing A24. This movie apparently failing at the box office, especially comparison to its budget. But I think the big headline seemed to be that A24 assumed that The Rock would bring the fans, and they didn't show up, mostly. Now, I don't know, because there was a row of people in my theater that at the end of the movie stood up and clapped. And we're like, that was woohoo. These were the same people who very audibly complained about 30 minutes of trailers. So I don't think they go to the movies that often. And I'm not going to repeat what they said because it was not very polite. But they were outraged at how long it took for the movie to start. So I think Greg's onto something in terms of like, I think you're going to like this no matter what, as long as you're interested in MMA fighting and or The Rock. But what do you think about The Rock is like failing to getting butts in the seats?
I mean, it's a huge loss for him, like in terms of his record, right? I mean, this is the guy who opened Red One, an abysmally bad movie last fall, right? Like, that's one I walked out of because I was like, this is complete trash. And I rarely do that. But like, that was a huge hit, right? Because people show up. And I think it's a really good question, Jem, because I think The Rock's brand has been in flux probably since Black Adam most severely, right? Because that's the moment where he kind of rejects the Fast and Furious franchise and is like, no, I'm going in my own direction. I'm a big enough star. I can do anything. He said he was going to reshape the DC universe. The power structure is going to change. And it flopped really hard. And so for whatever reason, people were kind of done with that Rock. And then kid-friendly Rock, I would say, pull aside Moana, which is kind of not on his charisma, though it's a very good performance. Kid-friendly Rock continues to do pretty well, right? Like the comedy mode and so on. So I can't imagine people seeing this trailer. He is wearing some prosthetics that really change his appearance. I mean, I think it's still clear it's The Rock, but I can't see anybody who's like, man, I love Central Intelligence Agency. I can't wait to go see this, right? Like, It felt like one of those times where you're like, oh, Jim Carrey's in The Truman Show. He's really trying something different. Oh, Adam Sandler's in Punch Drunk Love. I wonder how this will go. And I just can't see them getting excited to go see that. It seems like you wait and hear how it goes, and then you watch it on streaming.
Yeah, I think it's unreasonable to expect for him to draw the same people who like him in those modes to this. And I think that Greg's the list of people and roles that he just mentioned is like a perfect example of sort of like you have to temper expectations. I think the issue with this in particular was you mentioned its wild reception at Venice, and this belief that we were going to watch like just like a staggeringly good performance, and like we'll talk about it in a bit and what we think about it. I think that I actually fault the screenplay more than anything in this movie, but I will say I'm not sure I don't understand the directing award either. But and again, I wasn't the hugest rock fan before, but I did enjoy him in the mode that Greg mentioned. But I do think it's a big ask if you liked him in Red One to see for them to see this trailer and think like that's something I want to shell out money for and be there on the opening weekend.
Fans of The Rock do not want to see The Rock transform into another person, I think is maybe the takeaway there. So yeah, it's not good for his like I'm a serious actor now pitch, but I guess we'll see, because it he could very well. I'm spoiling Oscars watch a little bit, but I feel like if anybody is coming out of this unscathed in terms of award season, it's probably him. You know what I mean? It might be one of those things where like people want to reward him, but we kind of ignore that the movie exists. But more on that later. All right. So if you have not seen The Smashing Machine, we're not actually recommending that you go see it necessarily, unless you're in that specific subset of people who might like it. But if you do want to hear our conversation about it, just know that we are going to talk about spoilers from here on out. All right, so the film has a lot going on. There's a lot of elements. It's sports and fighting, like a fighter story, like a boxing, wrestling, whatever story, as we kind of talked about earlier, it's a romance, which we haven't talked about as much, and it's an addiction story, which I weirdly made a joke about earlier, but we didn't actually talk about it yet. So we're generally, our conversation for the next few minutes is going to be kind of looking at the movie through those three lenses. So we'll start with kind of extending our conversation about this as a sports movie. So we sort of talked about how it's kind of trying to subvert the traditional genre in some senses, but I think in others it kind of reverts back to some tropes of that genre. But how do you think it handled representing the specifics of ultimate fighting, or like how do you think the sports aspect of this is represented?
I'll start with ultimate fighting because I have some questions. um, I there I there when they described what ultimate fighting was, because I have not watched anything like this. I don't know anything about this. But when they discussed the prospect of like different styles of fighting against one another, right? Like the best at this particular style of fighting versus someone at this, like that sounds intriguing to me. And I kept thinking like that through the fights we were going to see more sort of like interesting choreography that would sort of show the benefits and the you know the unique strengths of each type of fighting. But you know, Mark Kerr and Mark Coleman both have a similar style that just sort of like dominates kind of immediately the other side. And it's like the same move. I feel like it was the same like you know flip them over and on the ground and then pound pound pound, right? And so there wasn't what the this sort of like variation in the fighting that I expected from fight to fight. And as a result, I feel like we actually didn't see that many fights, but that felt like a little bit of a relief because it was like every time I saw one, it felt like sort of the same thing. Now, Jen, you're saying as someone who's watched this, that that's often how just like it sort of plays out. But I don't know, like if that's the truth, then like why? I mean, what is the appeal then of like having these different styles if it's just like everyone gets beaten up by the same sort of like brute strength?
Yeah. So there's sort of two layers to answering this question. One is general to UFC and one is specific to this movie. The general to UFC thing is that like, yes, the fights that are usually the most exciting are the ones that, as Mark Kerr actually tries to explain to that poor unsuspecting woman in the waiting room, right? He tries to pitch it like, oh, like I'm more of a wrestler, but I might be going up against someone who's more of a karate person, and like, isn't that interesting, right? That ultimately is the pitch of why not just boxing, why not just martial arts, why not just wrestling, why do those all those things don't have to be separate, let's combine them all into this ultimate fighting, right? So that's part of the promise of it, but in general a big problem is that as I think you see in the types of fights that we see in this movie, the the big heavyweight well, part of it's a weight class thing too, is that
Sure.
Mark Kerr, I think I'm assuming based on how he looks and how he fights, is a heavyweight. And so part of it is like you're more likely to get more variety in the lighter weight classes because the like, you know, the like someone who's a like a karate champion primarily, or taekwondo or something like that, and then they get into ultimate fighting, like they're probably not going to be as bulky, right? Just by the nature of how they're training and stuff like that. So but it does the fight in general, and this is, I think, and again, I'm basing this mostly on my observation and not necessarily like I haven't like consumed a lot of commentary on MMA, but like it always favors the huge guy who can just wrestle you to the ground. Like, and oftentimes fights that are boring are because it's like immediately the bigger dude just like knocks you over, the other guy over, and then we just spend the whole time of him like in like a headlock, or like he's pinned to the ground, and then we're just punching and punching and punching until he gives up or passes out. So like it's not uncommon for that to be like a disappointing, like, oh, like, wow, it was really impressive that he did that, but at the same time it was not that interesting to watch. The problem with this movie, I think, is because the time period is, because this is like at the beginnings of UFC, and I should have mentioned a recommendation algorithm that like this is like very lightly an origin story for mixed martial arts, but like not really. That's more of like a backdrop than the actual main part of the story. But I think that's part of the historical context, is like, since the sport is fairly new, a lot of the fighters are not training to really be well-rounded yet, right? They're like a wrestler who just decides to join, or a martial artist who decides to join. So I think that's part of the problem. And because Mark Kerr and Mark Coleman are both former wrestlers, like that's their background, that we're more likely to see this style of fighting. So I don't know if that doesn't like excuse the fact that they didn't show other stuff. Like there's a version of this movie that shows a variety of fights and actually like is about like, hey, there's this new thing called mixed martial arts. Isn't this weird? And people didn't accept it at first. And like, there's that version of this movie that I think would be much more interesting to watch, to actually see more fights that fulfill that promise. But I don't know if that helps.
It does help, and I was in my head being like, oh, okay, Jen's talking a lot specifically about sports. Where are we? What's happening? But also, like, can you tell it to me like it's Super Smash Brothers? So this is Donkey Kong and Bowser, and you're just pounding at each other.
Thank you.
And somewhere, somebody from Final Fantasy is like flipping around and shooting laser beams in a different ring.
In a different fight, but not these fights that are Mark Kerr fights, basically, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I don't have a lot to add about that specific point because you made it nicely and with more expertise than I do. But I will say there were a couple scenes in this movie that I would go to bat for that I actually did really like. And one of them is when Mark Kerr is sitting in that doctor's office and he's explaining, the Ultimate Fighting Championship to this grandma who seems to be there in the waiting room. Only suffered slightly from the fact that that's the trailer, and I've seen that like 50 times. But it is a really nice moment because I think what this movie is really interested in, and what I would say is the most interesting part of fitting into the sports genre, is looking at this huge gap between essentially, this really gentle person, Mark Kerr, and the sheer brutality that his sport demands of him. And again, when you're talking about other versions of this film, there are hints that like he doesn't know how else to make money and that they do actually really need the money. And yet that's not really played up here in the way a kind of underdog story would in another sports movie, like say Dodgeball, where it's all about saving the gym or something like that. See, I know sports
Mighty Ducks.
too, Jen. Mighty Ducks got to save the pack. Yeah. But I do really like this kind of juxtaposition between how gentle they present him on the outside of this. And since we're in spoiler mode, we can say when Mark Kerr appears at the end, it seems like they got that spot on. They at least present him as this kind of fumbly, like, almost dainty guy in a lot of ways. And I liked that. That I was very interested in. I was like, yeah, tell me the story about the guy who is gentle and like deathly afraid that somebody would leave a waiting room afraid of him, and yet has to make his money pounding the snot out of guys his same size while greased up in a ring halfway around the world, right? That to me is really interesting. And in case we don't come back to it, the other one I really loved was when he doesn't go on the amusement park ride with Dawn. And it's like the same kind of thing because he's like, oh, but you know about my tummy. Can I maybe just stand on the inside because my tummy gets upset? And it's this hulking man saying the word tummy. Like there's nothing not to love about that. And like how ridiculous.
He says the word tummy like 3 times in the movie.
I know. And sometimes at first I thought he was playing it up because it was part of his cover to get extra medication, right? I'm like, oh, he's faking it. But then later it's like, no, I think he just says tummy. And like there's a sweetness that I think that gets to The Rock's skill set in a really nice way, that he makes it believably sweet and yet is also intimidating in the ring. So those are my favorite parts of kind of the sports part of this, is like, what does this kind of sport force on us? I don't know The Rock particularly well outside of movies, but my understanding is that's kind of what happened to him when he entered the WWE, right? That he didn't necessarily want to be a jerk, but nobody really liked him. So he became like a heel character that everybody could hate and root against, and then has turned into the charm machine we know in Hollywood.
I want to we normally start spoiler mode by talking about the ending. And I want to, since the ending, before the sort of like real life Mark Kerr shows up, there's the final fights, I guess. This is a movie where like everything is broadcast well before it happens, right? You see like a vial of something and he's a drug addict. One thing that the characters predict that doesn't happen is a mark on mark final bout, right? Instead, bizarrely, Mark Coleman's triumphant victory at the end is interspersed with these scenes of Mark Kerr. Like, I think he's getting stitches, right? He's getting tended to. Um, and it was the strangest way, I think, to present these things. And this is a directorial choice. So I'm curious what your thoughts are, because to me, you know, I actually thought that the dynamic, and I think that Jen, based on your Letterboxd review, you'd agree that the dynamic between the two Marks was potentially the most interesting thread of this, but it is relegated here to sort of the C plot, to the point where, Mark Coleman's victory. Mark Coleman, I think is the sort of like most decent like character in the entire piece. He's a family man. He's just doing this stuff. He's just doing this to support his family, and he seems like a good guy, a good friend. Um, but in there was something about because it moved between the two Marks at the same time, and also Mark Coleman's like ultimate victory is so short. It feels like it's not given like a proper highlight. And again, because it keeps shifting to Mark Kerr, and as if it's sort of insisting that we also need to pay attention to Mark equally during this moment. It sapped something from that particular plot line, which is just an interesting choice, and one that to me just sort of deflated the end of this. So I wanted your thoughts on the logic behind this, and on what the movie is trying to tell us by choosing to present their endings in this way.
I sort of interpret it as, because they're best friends, normally they would both be celebrating this amazing victory that one of them had, right? But the intercutting of Mark Kerr getting stitched up with Mark Coleman just sitting by himself, he is very much basking in, like, he's wearing the belt, right, and he's got the absurdly big trophy next to him and stuff like that. So it's not like he's not happy about his win, but he is very much alone in that scene, right? And to me, it was more about kind of like the loneliness that the two of them in this moment probably would rather be out partying and celebrating together, but instead they're just sitting alone. I mean, obviously Mark Kerr has the doctor there, but like, you know what I mean? Like alone with their thoughts, kind of. This is very much like a man alone with his thoughts sort of movie, I think. So that was sort of what it was trying to show. I think you're right, Antonio, that like it with the movie that we had gotten up until that point, that doesn't fit. Because I think the movie, it's almost like the movie realized, oh wait, there's a better story here between the two Marks. And I'm biased because yes, my Letterboxd review said release the Marks cut, please. Like, I want the version of this movie that only has two Marks and no Don, and no other stuff. You know what I mean? Like, it's just the two of them. But I think it's like the movie realized, oh wait, the story of these two fighters who are best friends, and they thought they were going to be fighting against each other, but then they ended up not fighting against each other, but they're still separated because one got hurt and lost, and the other one, because he got hurt, the other one got hurt and lost, actually went on to win because he had an advantage going into the last fight, right? Because they say that the Mark Kerr's opponent got injured, so that he ended up getting a different opponent than he was supposed to, Mark Coleman. So I don't know. Yeah, to me that's what it was supposed to be, but I agree that it didn't really belong with the story we had gotten up until that point.
So literally to my left, I have a stack of Blu-rays waiting to be put away, and the one on top is Inside Llewyn Davis, which, go watch that movie, not Smashing Machine. But one of the kind of brilliant strokes the Coens do in that movie is they tell you about the loser who was on stage moments before Dylan nailed it and got everything right and hit the moment and rode the wave right into everything we saw Timmy show us last December, right? And I feel, maybe because I'm looking at that Blu-ray, but I do feel like there's a little of that going on in the ending, that Mark Kerr just misses the wave, right? He's right there. I should not continue to extend this metaphor, but he's right there. He's on his board. He's right there as it's cresting, but he misjudged it slightly and it crashes forward without him. And, the epilogue and the final card suggests that Coleman also pretty much missed that wave, even though I think this ending is, in my mind, meant to show like the difference of that timing, right? When you get all the glory and you get all that, but it's such a thin line between getting all the money and the glory and the fame and just missing it, right? And the film seems interested in these two men as they just missed it. And I want to talk at some point about that kind of last gesture where it's essentially like, so you jerks who don't know who they are need to wisen up because they built everything you love, which gets it a little too heavy-handed. But I do like that moment. Like, if you're not riding that wave exactly right, then you're in the basement getting stitched up with a like terrible doctor. He seems like a fine doctor, but like it's brutally like painful looking, and it really is upsetting. And that's the difference, is just that kind of thin slice from one to the other. And it's tragic. I think I just want to co-sign the statement that like it was almost there that the film figured out what they wanted to edit it the whole time to be about. And it seems, I'm just co-signing Jen's Letterboxd review, it seems way more compelling than anything that happens between Mark and Dawn, which maybe we'll use as our transition into the next section here. So genre number 2 that was on our list is a relationship genre, right? So Dawn and Mark's tempestuous relationship introduces another and perhaps more lacerating kind of fighting into the film. How do you think the movie worked as a relationship drama? Now, I'm going to anticipate that answer and then add on top of it a secondary question. What separates this from something like May December, which is not, I'm going to steal Antonio's language from before. This is a Lifetime movie gone bad. And yet May December was like this elevation of a Lifetime drama that everybody's like, oh, this is deliciously campy. I suspect this was aiming at deliciously campy. So how did it miss in both directions is my question to you both.
Okay. I'm not sure that it was meant to be deliciously campy. So I was very confused about how to read Dawn in particular. When Mark Coleman looks upset when Emily Blunt's Dawn arrives to sort of dote on Kerr, I just assumed that the fault lay with Mark Coleman. That he was just like, this was like, it was misogyny and he just didn't like this woman, and like and that's, we would unpack that later. And there were moments early on, like from the trailer, when Emily Blunt is taking the picture of them, and then a tear, goes down her face. I'm like, oh, I'm meant to feel for this woman, to empathize with her. She's suffering. She's doing her best. But later on in the piece, it becomes pretty clear that I think we're meant to view Dawn the same way that the male characters in the film do, as a destructive, narcissistic drama queen who adds like very little value to Kerr's life. And it's just a really thankless role, one that Emily Blunt, I think, tries her best with. But I think it's telling that by the time, like, toward the end of the film, when she like grabbed a gun and pointed it to her head, it felt like a parody of like these kinds of things, and like these kinds of relationships and how it would end. And like, I remember I started to laugh a little, and then people in the theater were like, "What's wrong with this guy?" But because, but I think that the issue is because it's performed, it's framed in a particular way, and then when all of a sudden there's, I don't know if it's a shift or if it was just like, I don't know what it was just so hard to figure out what to do with her and how to receive that character. Part of it, I think, is that Emily Blunt is a very likable actor, and there's a lot of goodwill that I just sort of associate with her, and so when she shows up, I just expect, and when she showed up in the mode that she did, and just full on emoting, I thought like, okay, I'm meant to feel something for her. I'm supposed to empathize with her. But I don't know. I do think it's really tough, and I think that the fighter analogy of just like, you can be an Amy Adams or you can be a Melissa Leo. You can be kind of like a monster, or you can be like, the supportive whatever. Like, but it seemed like, to try to do this mix, she wanted to do both, and it just resulted in just an awkward dynamic, both for the characters and their interplay, but also for me as an audience member in figuring her out.
So I think ultimately the biggest problem with the Dawn character is that ultimately whatever attempts are made, and there are some, to both sides their relationship, because I do think there are scenes like the cactus scene where it's like, oh gosh, like Mark is incredibly controlling and toxic, and like how is she putting up with this? You know what I mean? I do think for a while it tries to sort of say they had a toxic, complex relationship and both of them were at fault. Like I believe that for probably the first 2 acts of the movie. And then it becomes very clear through the editing, and it clicked for me during his second loss when his trainer is like, "Are you sure about this?" Because Don shows up, and it's basically every time Don shows up, he loses and is devastated, and it messes his life up. And like this happens twice, right? The 2 times that are like tragic losses for him. Not so coincidentally, it's intercut with him fighting with Dawn, or Dawn shows up and she's not wanted, right? And like the looks from both Mark Coleman, who I agree, otherwise really good guy. The looks from him, and I can't remember the trailer's name, or the trainer's name from like the guy he actually injects with the narcotics, and he's like, woo. Like at the end, that guy.
Hollywood
also
Jiu-Jitsu Man. I don't remember either. Hollywood Jiu-Jitsu Man, but I don't remember either. Come on, he's from your neighborhood. You two live in Hollywood.
Oh, he's playing himself. Sebastian Bas Rutten is a Dutch-American actor, former mixed martial artist, kickboxer, and professor. So he also looked. I'm like, this guy looks legit. Like he seems like he's not an actor. Anyway, the looks that he's giving her as they're packing up the car and driving away with her like 15 suitcases in the back, like is just really incriminating. You know what I mean? Like in a way that I felt icky about, to be honest. So I think you're right. And I think what happens is that I feel icky by the end of this movie about Dawn, because the movie is ultimately, as we see in the final scene, a biopic about Mark Kerr. I think that actually transcends any of the other genres we're going to be talking about, because it's like as we said earlier, like the point is like these are the 2 guys who started it all and no one remembers them. So we making this movie are going to make sure you know Mark Kerr's name. We are literally going to have a title card that says, and his name was Mark Kerr. Like it's like a say my name moment. That is so cringy.
There was also a card that said that they got married, right? That they got married and they had a
child.
kid.
I was like, oh no, they brought a child into this? Like,
yeah, so it's further confusing. Early in the movie, I felt so much for Emily Blunt that I resolved to myself when they were fighting that if Mark Kerr hits Emily Blunt, I am walking out of this movie. Like I'm not going to watch any more of this. I have no desire. When they finally do have like a moment, instead of hitting her, Greg alluded to like
door.
He smashed the door. And again, I laughed because the only thing I could think about was the Kool-Aid Man movie from the studio.
But there's also the kintsugi metaphor. Greg, did you pick up on this? Okay. Do you want to, because I've been talking for a while, do you want to like...
No, you should make your smart point. Don't hand me a gem. Don't hand me a work of art. You should take it yourself, please.
So the kintsugi, which I feel like this is now a bunch of movies have now used this as a metaphor now. I'm not thinking of the other ones, but I feel like this is a thing that we've now used up all of our kintsugi points in cinema. But like, so the kintsugi is a Japanese pottery style where you take broken pieces or shards and you glue them together with gold. And the idea is that in the broken pattern is what makes it beautiful, right? And they explain this at length in the movie, right? Because Mark Kerr buys this in a Japanese gift shop while he's away to give to Dawn. And then Dawn smashes it in anger because she knows it's probably like a prized possession or like very valuable to him. And it was a gift like from him to her, right? Or maybe it wasn't because she got the scarf. So like, because my girl loves color, right? Is what he says. And then she crazy glues, like it's supposed to be a really sweet moment where she crazy glues the thing back together. She's like, I don't have gold, but I had crazy glue. And it's supposed to, I looked it up what this type of pottery is supposed to be. It's like supposed to be beautiful because it looks ugly and broken, just like their relationship, right? But I feel like, so I think that might be the point, is that if it got glued back together, it was with crazy glue and not with gold. But
just loving your use of the brand name Crazy Glue because it it helps make your point in a delicious way. Yeah, I think that's right, and I don't know that I have anything too intelligent to add to this, but I do think that, you know, I agree that there's like a set of stereotypes that Emily Blunt is falling into here. And there's been a lot of discourse about how did we let one of our really talented actresses of this generation kind of fall into this trend. Now, Emily Blunt does not need defending. Emily Blunt makes her choices. And my understanding is she and The Rock are really close friends, that they bonded on Jungle Cruise, probably suffering at great ends to make that lesser film. And so he wanted her and she agreed to be with her. It's also interesting to me that she just did like Florida Dirtbag fairly recently in the Pain Hustlers. So she's working that opioid vein, which was a Netflix movie, but she's kind of, playing a trashy character who gets linked into the selling of painkillers in that one, as I recall. And like, I can see why she would be having fun playing this kind of over the top. I do think it falls into this space where if she was 10% more, it would make more sense, even if it's less realistic. And if she's 10% less, it's way less interesting, but probably closer to reality. So she's kind of stuck in this uncanny valley of she doesn't seem like a real human and yet also doesn't seem so unbelievable that it's there. I don't know the documentary, but it strikes me if I had the woman in the snakeskin, matching outfit, like walking into the room and throwing stuff and getting in people's faces, how would you not adapt that into the other version? Even though we all are arguing for the Mark cut. So I think I would have liked it if they really did push it into parody in that higher level, And again, when I name checked May December, something I was cooler on than the rest of you, as I recall. But I do remember that just like brilliant moment where Julianne Moore hands over the and this is what he made me, and it's like childhood art, and like that level of arch irony, like playing it straight. Like this movie could have used like a dose of that, where we could sense her crazy a little bit more. But and then the last thing I'll say, because I really wanted to pick up on this, I'm proud of Antonio for figuring out that he was on drugs early. I didn't figure it out when he got out the needles, or when he got out the rubber hose, or when he found his stash, or when he got out the vials. I only figured it out when the director zoomed in really tight on the label to make sure I could read opioids not safe for
highly addictive.
Yeah.
These are opioids, and they're highly addictive in all caps. Yeah. Well, and so I think the difference, to go back to your original question about May December, is that May December doesn't take itself seriously. It's leaning into its over the topness knowingly, whereas I feel like this is still trying to operate under the presumption that Mark and Dawn still love each other, or that there's some kind of, you know what I mean? Like that it's like, yeah, they were those crazy kids. Like, I feel like it's kind of ends with that. Like, that's why they tell us that they got married, right? Like, and to be fair, I feel like once I found out that Mark Kerr was like consulted on the movie, I don't know to what extent, obviously, but like that once I read that he was kind of involved in the process, I was like, oh, like this explains a lot. Because like I think he probably has complicated feelings about their marriage, and like, but still wants to, but I don't know.
He had to buy a lot of doors. It's a hard time in any man's life.
Right. She just couldn't get the smoothie right. If only she got the smoothie right.
I switched to whole milk, Jen. I switched to whole milk. It's in the rider for this show.
It's actually a banana and a half, not a half a banana. Yeah. And then the scene where he's like, "Can I have your knife?" I was like, "What is going to happen right now?" It's just, like, they really shot that knife in a way where I feel like we were supposed to think that like someone was going to use the knife on the other person at some point, but it didn't happen. So
my read of Mark Kerr was a little bit different, I think. I didn't think of him as just like this fundamentally sweet person and then like who had to go fight because that was like his job. I found something kind of like unsettling about like the scenes when he's being sweet, even the scenes like where he's explaining to the woman in the waiting room. I felt like this sort of like barely muffled rage. Like it always felt like it was like simmering under the surface, and that his sort of like way of talking was just this sort of affectation of this like the kind of coping strategy one learns from like an outdated self-help book. And it was just like, it's just like, sorry, I'm a little spiky today. but there was something about it that I didn't believe as like, I didn't buy as like a fundamental goodness inside him. I do think that he's ultimately like a good person who's trying his best, but I found his sort of presentational self unconvincing. Right? I found it like immediately unconvincing. So there was just, since in whatever mode I see him in, I guess I just found it unpleasant no matter what. Because I think that there are some moments that sort of like cut to it, like cut to maybe like the core of like what he doesn't want to show when he is really vulnerable, when he is crying, when he's really upset. Like that. But in that those other modes and like the fighting mode, I didn't. Again, I didn't find that particularly interesting or fun to watch. And then the sweet mode I found also, I was just sort of like waiting for him to either make the passive aggressive comment about like taking care of the cactus or to smash a door. Right. I was just sort of waiting. And that's not a great place to be when you're taking in a character.
For me, I couldn't quite decide if the movie wanted us to think he was just a really nice guy. And it was like, oh, you think he's going to be this big hulking brute, but he's actually pretty soft-spoken and articulate. I just really loved the interviews with the Japanese journalists where he just like can't come to terms with imagining what it might be like to lose because he hasn't lost yet. And he's like, he says some phrase like, he uses some weird phrasing like, I'm really trying to intellectualize with you here, but it's hard. I can't like, and so part of me thinks that maybe it's supposed to just be a endearing thing and like it's not coming across to Antonio especially, right? But then I couldn't decide how much menace the film wanted us to feel behind that, like how much of a, like you said, affectation it is, because I do think there are moments, especially when he's being a little bit more controlling and kind of trying his best to contain his rage. Another moment I think of is like after he's lost the first time and he goes to like the Pride League manager and tries to complain about the referee. He's still keeping his cool technically, but but his kind of like, can I see your manager kind of attitude feels very unsettling. And it's the same thing when he's talking to Don about the smoothie and he's technically being very nice and being like, you didn't know, it's okay. But you can tell he's like super mad about it. Right. Yeah. Or that he's like being very judgmental, like that this is a big offense that she has caused, even though his words are saying one thing, but his kind of like barely maintained cool is saying another. Right. So I couldn't decide how much the movie wanted us to be like kind of weirded out by his affectation versus endeared by it. Which
I think it's also difficult because now we're getting into sort of like the third mode of the movie, this addiction movie, which again we figure out pretty early on that's what's happening here is he's acting, right? Like a lot of what he's doing is putting on an act so that people will give him drugs, and that's what drug addicts do. So then, is this sweet persona just a way, because that is part of how he gets drugs, right? Is by seeming very calm and very reasonable and like, and using like these very soft tones. And and but then going to multiple pharmacies or not going through insurance or whatever, right? So there's a little bit of a con going on here too. So that's another thing. It's just like, what is real about this guy, especially in those first couple of acts? Then when we get sort of like the real Mark, I guess, post rehab, where he's just like talking about, what he's trying to do, what he's trying to build. The problem at that point is that then we're getting into sort of like maximum like Dawn versus Mark drama, right? And so we get a lot of scenes of him saying like, I just got out of like he said, I just got out of rehab at least a couple of times, to the point where I was like, you can't say that 3 times, right? In the course of however long this has been, that argument can work one time. And then Dawn's just like, oh, he's kind of not fun, right? We get a scene of just her and her girlfriend where he's like, where she's like, he's not fun anymore, or whatever, right? She says something to that effect. And on the one hand, like that's a terrible way to like take care of your significant other. And the other hand, like it's kind of like I agree, right? Like it's not very fun. So I don't know. It was hard for me. What do you think? What do you all think?
I would say like, hey, he wasn't fun before either. Right?
Yeah,
like,
that's true.
that's part of it.
Yeah,
But,
that's true.
There's almost a reading.
I think you're right, because I when you were talking, I was really thinking about that very early scene, and I think it's before I had totally grokked what was going on, where he's sweet talking the receptionist at his doctor's office, and he's like, "Oh, you know how they are at the pharmacy," and like that felt genuine in the moment, but then I started to be like, oh wait, he's using this sweet talk to like, look at how that's working out. He pays cash and there's no paper trail, and like you could start to piece that together. Maybe I'm just slower than most. I got kneed in the head a few times when I was younger. But like, I completely agree with the point Antonio's making, which is like, I spent so much time really trying to get a beat on who is this guy. That's why the ending is so surprising, where they're like, here he is, and you should love him. And I'm like, wait, should I? Like, I wasn't there yet when in the place, as Jen pointed out, when they're like, and his name is, and I didn't stand up and say, I'm Mark Kerr. We're all Mark Kerr. It just didn't really work. But, I will kind of note that within that kind of last piece, it felt to me that even the sobriety was performed, right? I did not feel, the way The Rock played it, like he needed to call Jeff. Calling Jeff was just like getting the smoothie just right, or just doing the weight routines. And it was like, it was a checklist that he is, putting his addictive behavior into. That's part of the model of NA or AA. And yet he wasn't actually, he was just trying to kind of check off those lists. So Jen, I want to turn it over to the point you were making, and maybe just note, because we should grade a little bit on a curve here, that playing addiction is really tricky. It's tricky territory for any actor. So as you're saying whatever your point was, can you transition that also into like, how did Dwayne Johnson do at portraying addiction?
To me, I actually thought he did pretty well in terms of, I don't know if they like put solution in his eyes or something, gave him some, like had him huff some pollen beforehand, or you know what I mean? Like, but his like 1,000-yard stare, where he looks really glazed over, looked so real to me that I was like, how is he doing that? Like, how? I'm like hair and makeup must have something to do with that, because he just like, his eyes actually just look so weird. But so to me, it was like when he was really stoned and trying to act like he wasn't. I think it was Adam Naiman on The Big Picture made this point, which I was like, oh yeah, you're right. Like that he had a friend apparently who was like, I'm not going to tell you why, but The Rock really knows how to act like someone who's really high and doesn't want other people to know. I think Adam Naiman joked, he was like, I didn't ask any further questions about how he knew that. So I think in that sense, the performance to me was very compelling. Like he did look like someone who is like trying to act like he's keeping it all together, but really he's falling apart because he has this addiction.
The like rock bottom moment of him seemingly ODing happens off screen, which, I actually might give the screenplay a little credit for that's usually a moment of high melodrama, right?
Sure.
Like, oh, she would open the door and be shocked and, oh, I loved you and I never, but, and they just kind of skip all that to the aftermath. And that's a case for where the Mark cut was served, right? That they make it much more about the two Marks. When Antonio said he never got a kind of real read on the real him, I would say maybe that's where I felt the closest, is when he breaks down with Mark Coleman and he's given it, he's fed him the kind of silly story that he's pretending, and then Coleman's just like, come on, dude, like, it's me. And
I think he says, it's just me. You don't have to apologize.
Yeah.
Right? Like, meaning like, you don't have to pretend with me. Like, I'm your friend. Whereas the implication is that he did have to pretend for Don. Also, like, this is what I was going to say earlier, and I just remembered. So piling more onto the, like, this movie is giving Don the short end of the stick is you could also read this as the film implying that she was the reason he was an addict, because they make a couple references to, we were out partying. Like, it's that early scene where Don's like, after he loses, she's like, well, I just thought you should know that, like, we've been really partying for the past 2 weeks. And he was like, excuse me? Like, you're telling me this now after he's lost? Like, and the same thing where they constantly reference her going out late at night, drinking with her friends, right? We have that scene where she's out with her friend. They're getting, like, margaritas and it's their birthday, or, you know, whatever it is, right? And so there is a lot of time spent almost blaming her for her lifestyle and how it had a bad influence on his sobriety, right? So again, like, not a great look. But if that's how Mark Kerr actually feels, you know what I mean? Like, if that's it, and the other trainers, it's just the gender dynamics of it are unfortunate. Let's move on to the rhetorical situation, a segment in which we look at a film through the lens of our academic experience. So all four of our regular co-hosts are writing professors. We like to have this section of the episode dedicated to making connections to our experience as scholars and teachers. In the teaching of writing, the rhetorical situation refers to any contextual factors that influence composing and interpretation. So obviously, this is also a space to talk about those factors. For the Smashing Machine, you know, I'm actually impressed that we haven't name dropped. We've sort of softly alluded to that a documentary exists, but it is an adaptation of John Hyam's critically acclaimed 2002 documentary, The Smashing Machine: The Life and Times of Extreme Fighter Mark Kerr. The fictional film even ends with a scene of the real, like, as we've talked about, real life. Also, like, I want to know your thoughts about, why is he pushing around a grocery cart in this scene? Why is that the thing we're watching him do? Why do you think Benny Safdie felt compelled to bring this story back to the screen in 2025? And having watched the first 15 minutes, granted that's only a small sample size, of this documentary, there are direct scenes, like the voiceover of him describing how it feels to fight, directly from the documentary. The waiting room scene, directly from the documentary. I was like, there's a lot of this that's just, like, shot for shot adapted, which I didn't expect.
I mean, Greg asked this question earlier, and it's my review. If I had to boil down this sort of, like, my review of this movie to, like, one word, it would be why, right? Like, if we had the documentary already, why? I can only imagine that Safdie has a lot of respect and fascination for Kerr, and he wanted to make a story worthy of him that could reach a larger audience, I guess. And hey, Dwayne Johnson wept at Venice because of the rapturous reception there, and if nothing else, like, Safdie gave him that. But I didn't understand what it ultimately wanted me to take away. I mean, the way that the movie ends with and his name is Mark Kerr, it seems pretty clear that it's meant to sort of, like, lionize Mark, and we're supposed to, like, appreciate him. But that's not the feeling that I had at the end of the movie. And so when it said and his name was Mark Kerr, I just sort of rolled my eyes and then walked out. How did you two receive the? What do you two think about, like, Greg's question? Why?
I mean, my question embodies the fact that I just hate this trend. And you know, Ron Howard did it fairly recently with the Thai children stuck in the underwater mine with the submarines. And Zemeckis did it a while ago now with the Man on Wire, where it's like a documentary becomes really famous for being a phenomenal documentary. And they're like, time to fictionalize it, but only doing it by degrees. And it's like, why? Like, and so that, dear listeners, that was me when Jen was setting up the question that lost my poker face. It was like, come on, because I find it so frustrating that if the documentary exists, and yes, documentaries get a much smaller, viewing number than a major release, although maybe not this one. But especially I do think the space of documentaries has been really vibrant in recent years, and between Netflix getting into that game a lot and just more attention on the Oscars, it's like it's doing really well, and maybe we could stop doing this. I completely agree with you that it was a big eye roll moment for me, and part of that is the fact that they're doing these funny little spy shots of the real Mark Kerr from like across the parking lot, and Mark Kerr isn't even taking it seriously. He's like grinning and pointing at the camera and smiling and like, like this is all fake. I'm like, so are we then supposed to take this kind of sanctimonious and his name is like in that spirit, or is it like done with a wink and a nod? I really couldn't tell. So my only conclusion, and it's not even trying to be generous to Benny Safdie, it's like the only conclusion I can come to is that he just really loves the kind of art and artistry of UFC and wanted to try to bring that in some way, and thought that the best thing to do would be to focus on these guys who were left out of it. That's the most generous read I have. I think just listeners, so we do have this kind of added component of, like the Coens before them, the Safdies have split up this year. And so we get Benny Safdie here, and we get Josh Safdie doing Marty Supreme in December. And it's already like, I think it's the same thing. Like the Coens really seem to need them balancing each other. And I'm worried about this. And I was rooting against this movie from Benny Safdie's appearance in Happy Gilmore 2, which is one of the worst things I've ever seen in my life. So
I kind of liked what his character was doing in that movie, though. Like the commentary about the like tech bro taking over a sport and trying to make it cooler for YouTubers. Like there's something there. I agree. The movie was not good. I made a reference earlier to, it's not just that we see Mark Kerr, we see Mark Kerr going around grocery shopping. And I feel like, to me, that signaled, like we were supposed to think about this whole movie as he's just an everyday guy. No one treated him special. In fact, he kind of they sort of like subtly hint that he maybe got financially exploited, right? There's that scene where he's like, wait, like no contract? And they're like, well, we have to discuss it, right? And that, like, you know what I mean? Like that he's kind of at the mercy of the Pride League. And I do think that part of the point is that, like, these are the guys that started it all, but they didn't actually profit at all off of it. Like they're not set for life, right? Even Mark Coleman, who won that $200,000, like, you can't imagine like that lasted that went that far, right? And that wasn't something he was winning every year, probably, right? So I think I think the grocery store thing is supposed to be like this, they're not these like weird superheroes. They're just these working people who this is just what they happen to do for a living. And they do they grow weird cactuses, and they go grocery shopping, and they do everyday things just like we do. I think that's kind of the point, and that they've been kind of like forgotten to history, and they're normal people don't recognize anymore.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think that we also got something about how like UFC fighters today make millions of dollars. And so fine, that's true that they, as you all said, that they came before the sort of windfall of like riches. But this happens in lots of things, right? Like there's plenty, like in all pro sports, there came a point where we just started paying them like obscene amounts of money. Like if we want to talk about people being exploited, right? Like there are older stories about like Motown singers, right? Who like don't make the money that like Beyonce makes today, right? And so like that's like I get that story, but I don't know. I guess I just at the end of the day, this particular person as a representation of someone who's sort of exploited by the system, I didn't necessarily think like that this person deserved so much of my attention in that for that story and for him missing out
Mhm.
on these riches. Like that's not going to make me tear up at the end of a movie. That's going to make me stand up with the bros who are sitting in your room, Jen.
I don't think they were all bros. I think they were mixed gender group.
All right,
I
all
didn't get a
right.
good I didn't get a good look at them. I mostly
My
heard
bad
them from
assumption.
behind me. Yeah. I
Yeah,
heard
yeah.
them from behind me, but they were like, "Yes. Woo!" Like they were really happy. So
I was just
like,
shocked
"Oh,
you had
that's
people in your
nice."
theater because I was very alone at 9 o'clock on Saturday, which was not a good sign. I kind of knew this one
Yeah.
was not
My
going to make
theater
it.
was like a third full, and this was
All right.
9:30 at night. So I wasn't actually expecting a big crowd because of the time. It was like when I parked my car, everyone was leaving the mall because it was Sunday night. So I was like, oh, and so yeah, the theater. But yeah, there were a couple groups of people, like big groups of people in there.
Yeah, the box office wasn't so great, right, for
No,
this. And so the question is, does that affect its Oscar chances moving forward?
aha. So I feel like in terms of its awards chances right now, this film has really been on a roller coaster because it was like we went from the highs of Venice, where it was like, Benny Safdie won a prize at the Venice Film Festival for directing, and it was like, oh, like this is a big awards player potentially. And now that the movie's coming out, I feel like so many of the reviews I'm absorbing now are more likely than not pretty negative. And I'd say more people are in line with Greg and Antonio than with me, probably in terms of their reaction to this movie. So like, what does that mean? Like, how does this compute in terms of its Oscar chances going forward?
I think that the only chance is Dwayne Johnson for Best Actor, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there are examples in the past. Nothing comes to mind right this second, but of something where where people discarded the movie, don't like anything about it except for a performance, and that gets at least nominated, right? And I think we talked in our last episode about how Best Actor in particular is maybe a little bit of a thinner field than in past years, so it might be a little bit easier to make room for Dwayne Johnson, and he is an enormously popular actor who has made lots of box office, who has made lots of friends, and who is doing the work to put on something that is like out of his typical lane, but something that generally like actors in particular respect. And it's like it's the kind of movie that actors like have rewarded in the past, like all of the kinds of movies, right? We've got a biopic, we've got like, a toxic romance, we've got an addiction story. And like, if you were like calculating or like making in a lab a sort of like what kind of movie would be a best actor contender, this is the kind of thing that could maybe work. So it just depends on how people sort of receive it. The Venice reception in particular, I thought this is going to be a strange comparison, but just go with me for a second. I think back to like how Anatomy of a Fall wasn't the choice of France for their like Oscar movie, right? That for the one that they put in contention. And the only reason that I can think of for that was that in France, that courtroom drama is less novel because like they have courtroom drama, like they understand that system. And so it was a little less novel of a thing to them. And so they went with something else that they just loved more. And so maybe it's a sort of similar thing, but in the inverse that that the performance here was sort of like uniquely American, not Italian. I don't know, just something that felt really novel to them. The other thing that I can think of to get a standing ovation is that I don't know if this is true, but like Mark Kerr and was there maybe, right? Like something in the sort of alchemy of like that particular moment um, that that would get an audience to really feel for the performers and the people involved, because there's just such a disconnect. I didn't really want to watch this movie, but I was curious about it because of that reception and because of the buzz that I'd heard. Um, so I was like sort of stunningly like disappointed. What do you all think about Do you agree that that the best actor is its only shot, or do you think that it has a shot in some other categories?
I would just add that best actor, but probably paired with a hair and makeup nom.
Okay.
I know this is always my beat,
Mhm.
is the
Yeah.
pairing of acting nominations with
Sure.
hair and makeup, but I think there's enough of a transformation, and I have heard a lot of people say, wow, I was really surprised that when I watched this, I didn't just see The Rock, that I actually, like, The Rock kind of faded away as like an iconic persona, and I was able to see what I thought was Mark Kerr, right? And I think that's largely because of the prosthetics and the makeup work on his face. And his hair. I was like, once he shaved his head, I was like, The Rock's back or Mr. Clean.
Sorry, Antonio was talking about the Venice reception, so I just was Googling, trying to see if I can see a picture of The Rock hulking in a gondola, because that sounds funny to me. But
I think he cried during the
yeah,
ovation.
I remember those
right?
clips going around. So I think that is the lane, as Antonio just rightfully put his finger on. Like, he is really well loved in Hollywood, and he is one of those guys who seems to have the reputation of being a good guy and a generous collaborator in a lot of ways. So that goes far in these distances. I was also thinking when Antonio, you were listing all the things, he does, it's like, oh man, the Golden Globes are going to be so all over this one, right? Like when you expand it out to 10 nominees, they're going to absolutely get him there in the front row, because this is the kind of star they love to have there. I think his problem is that is a pretty tough category at the moment. Let me say it this way. It looks like it might be tough this year, but we haven't seen so much that it's hard to know for sure. And I had the distinct pleasure moments ago of watching Jen Googling to open up Gold Derby, knowing it was already open on my computer. And it was, so they at the top have Leo, which I completely agree with. I think it's Leo's to lose at this particular moment. Given the kind of high watermark of One Battle After Another from the past week. And then they put in Michael B. Jordan and Timothée Chalamet as their locks. That sounds right to me, but again, nobody has seen Marty Supreme, and it's reportedly very long and not that crowd pleasing, but we'll see, right? Because nobody's seen it. So by the way, I figure that if you take those three, then those last two spots get pretty crowded between Jeremy Allen White singing his actual Springsteen-y heart out, and then I jumped to a bunch of names that they don't jump to. I was thinking of Will Arnett if that movie really makes a splash. Bradley Cooper gets his actors nominated usually, right? If that really stands out. I thought about there Plemons in Begonia, who they'd have down at 7. And they still throw in George Clooney and Paul Mescal at 9 and 10, which is not that far away. Again, I know people have seen some of these movies, but we have seen so little. We don't know what the crowd consensus is. So, I mean, I think the transformation point is really good. I love that the new Springsteen trailers, like IndieWire says, Jeremy Allen White totally transforms. And then they show you 10 scenes of Jeremy Allen White looking exactly like Jeremy Allen White. So it's like, it doesn't, no, that's just him. That's just Carmi singing Springsteen songs. So I'm less sure that that's going to hit as well as some screenings would suggest. But I think it's a tough road for The Rock, but there's room. Jen, did I prognosticate correctly, Googling faster than you?
I think so. The only data I'll add is that when I go to the Anklers pundit site, that's pretty freshly minted, but it has a lot of different people from different outlets giving their predictions. The majority of them have The Rock somewhere. They're all ranked. He's in different spots. Like for some people, he's ranked number 2, but other people he's more often than not number 4 or number 5 on the list. But he's on pretty much everybody's list. So that has to count for something. And I do think a lot of people are factoring in the campaign that this movie might have, specifically with him. I think I even heard Matt Bellany today on The Town when he was trashing A24 as and their failures, was sort of saying this strategy is really confusing. Why didn't they market this more like I don't know if he actually said this, but more like F1, where it's like they have these fans of UFC and of this fighting, like, why wouldn't you like make this more of a commercial play? Why did it go to Venice? Why that feels like a too prestige-y? And he sort of said, like, maybe that's what The Rock demanded, because The Rock is all about, like, I'm going to be taken seriously as an actor now. I think that's assuming a lot. I don't know how powerful The Rock is that he can just like demand that. Maybe he can. I don't know. But I do think that the campaign, because he and Emily Blunt are best buddies, this movie kind of came about because Emily Blunt and Benny Safdie were shooting Oppenheimer. I don't know if either of you have heard the story, that apparently Benny Safdie sent The Rock some Mark Kerr memorabilia and was like, hey, do you want to do this movie? And then like it never got to him, or like some poor publicist like never gave it to him or something. And then he was telling Benny Safdie on the set of Oppenheimer is telling the story to Emily Blunt, who's besties with The Rock. And then like she calls him and is like, hey, did you know that Benny Safdie wanted to make this Mark Kerr movie with you? And he was like, I also want to make this Mark Kerr movie. And then then it began. Nice. So I do think that there's like a behind the scenes sort of cast campaigning factor that could give him a bit of a boost. But I would agree that like I kind of like the score. Not as much as I like the score in One Battle After Another, but it does have that sort of similar sort of jazz solo vibe to it. But yeah, other than that, I don't think so. Emily Blunt barely made it in for Oppenheimer. I think that she's not making it in for this.
I think we're over those performances from her, right? We've seen it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Gold Derby, I think, interestingly, has her down at number 7, just behind Amy Madigan for Weapons, which I think is really funny and exciting if that one could happen. But again, it's funny because I feel like as I start to listen to pundits kind of do the race, statistics, like, we're still a little bit all over the place, right? As things solidify, there's something that kind of casts them the opposite way, exactly like we're talking about. Smashing Machine gets this huge wave, and then all of a sudden, like, it flops and nobody seems that excited about it, and it kind of pushes it back down. We still have Marty Supreme out there as they have Gwyneth Paltrow up at 5, but that might fail. They do have Emily Blunt just ahead of Chase Infinity, which I would say after seeing those two movies, I'd take Chase Infinity anytime over this performance.
I had this movie in my Vulture movie draft.
Oh, Jen, what happened?
I committed to the bit too much because I wanted to do both Safdie films. I do think there's actually a very interesting narrative of like, this is a tale of 2 Safdies and 2 sports movies.
Yeah.
And, I watched the trailer for Marty Supreme before this and I was like, this looks kind of good. Yeah. I'm kind of excited for this.
I'm excited for Marty Supreme. Yeah.
Because I think it will be just weird enough, but not in a self-serious way, potentially. I don't know. We'll see. But yeah, I do think that the narrative of an award season where it's like Safdie versus Safdie is like quickly fading away. But that's what I based my Vulture Movie League picks on, was choosing both those movies. I don't think I'm going to actually get a lot of points from this one. So, oh well.
Well, and we don't have to do a full A24 analysis, but you threw it out, and I will volunteer. I think A24 has lost its game a little this year. When you think about what a strong year they had last year, and they picked up, so Civil War to me is an example of them stepping outside their comfort zone, and they were really rewarded. Like, it made a good amount of money. It was critically well received. A little mixed, but mostly well received. And then you look to this year, we've gone Materialist, we've gone highest to lowest, we have Smashing Machine. There were a bunch in the spring that just didn't work. Death of a Unicorn, Friendship, which was fun at times, but didn't really seem to click. It's like, I think they paid a lot more money for their movies this year to get much bigger talent, and it hasn't paid off. And it's an interesting moment to watch them. Because, this time last year, we're like, oh my gosh, they could have 2 serious contenders. This could be, the new hit studio, the kind of rivaling Miramax in the 90s. And I think that it's not looking good this year. They will get some acting nominations, maybe out of this, maybe out of Rose Byrne, and If I Had Legs, I'd Kick You. And then Marty Supreme is theirs as well. So there's still potential, but looking a little rocky. I think I would rather have some stock in Neon or Mubi even this year, based on the releases yet to come that are getting buzz.
I was gonna say A24 is Mark Kerr, Mubi is Mark Coleman, right? The loss, one's going down, and then the other one can rise.
Yeah, use the same model, but yeah, just a little bit better. Ride that curve. Perfect.
So, Antonio, I want to thank you. Shout out, you put together the outline today. Even though you did not like this movie, you still wanted to talk about it. I really appreciate that. Where can folks find you? And I know there's only one place.
You can find me on Letterboxd at Alefano, Aelefano. And I will just say, like, even a bad movie, if I whatever occasion I have to chat with you three is good, a good time for me. So I was perfectly happy to be here to talk about it. So thanks for the chat. Greg, where can folks find you?
They can find me online on Letterboxd at EyonCanon, EYEONCANON. Completely agree with that sentiment. And I will say, you know, a bad night at a movie is still a pretty good night anywhere else. I mean, it's still, you know, magic to be there and to be a part of even a bad movie and see something like this. So I don't think I have any cool Letterboxd projects to plug. I'm working hard to catch up on rarer Carey Mulligan movies because she's the actress I'm trying to concentrate on this year. And so I've been digging into the free ones that are out there. It's rough times, my friends. It's rough times.
Oh,
No, to nothing to her. It's like, you know, she's in it for a minute or two and I have to watch Natalie Portman stuck between Tobey Maguire and Jake Gyllenhaal. It's a rough time out there. Find my review for Brothers now on Letterboxd. Jen, where can people find you in the podcast?
They can find me on Instagram, Threads, and Blue Sky at Sopchockchai, SOPCHOCKCHAI, or on our movie fantasy league roster, LTR Pod, under Fun Cut Gems, because I am that committed to the Safdie brothers apparently. And you can also find me on Letterboxd at Qui-Gon Jen. I really want to. I wish we could do Letterboxd logins or reviews for trailers, because I have a lot of questions about the Eternity trailer that at least was screened before mine.
Also A24. Yeah.
I was just like, what is this? What is this?
Did you like The Good Place? Do you wish Divine Joy Randolph was in it? Coming to theaters
But it's like
soon.
The Good Place, but if it were Nicholas Sparks, I feel like that's the feeling I get. Right?
Yeah.
Okay. But I still might watch it because I was like, I like all these actors. Like,
Jen, I really liked that, you know, Smashing Machine is down. Antonio and I are hitting it, punching it, kicking it in the head, and you're finally the ref who called it. You're like, nope, he's done. Nope, he's out. TKO. We're done. We're done. Get out of here. Good night, everybody.